So I'm Eric Peters, so I'm system engineer working together with Bart. So I'm, as he told, his technical conscience. So if he's starting to tell BS, then I can stand him corrected, and we can make sure that the things we sell work as we expect. Maybe before I dive into the presentation, for the ones who are already our customers, so 25th of October, last night, we released our 8.0 release. Was it going to be 7.4, but then marketing decided we will make it 8.0 because there's a lot of new stuff in it. And it's basically about some of these points that I will talk in my presentation. So let's swap to that one. Come on. Okay. So my agenda for today, Infoblox DNS traffic control exists already for a bit. Any one of you who looked into DNS traffic control yet? It's a GSLB-based solution? Nobody? Anybody using DNS-based load balancing, GSLB with a separate load balancer or something? Nobody again? Any reason why not? Too expensive to have a separate load balancer maybe? So we have a good solution for that. So it's already around for a while, but we improved it dramatically or drastically in 8.0. So there's a few new things that make it really compelling to use it internally, and we'll talk about that. We added to our public cloud offering Microsoft Azure. So we did Amazon for a while. We are also doing multiple vendors in the internal cloud, like OpenStack, VMware, and all the orchestrators around it. So in 8.0 we also added support for Azure. And we'll also talk a bit about the VMware plugin 4.0, which is for automating your orchestration, the IPAM part in your orchestration. So if you want to spin up new machines in the data center, to automate the IPAM and the DNS part. Anybody already played with the earlier plugins? So I see a nod there. Well, for the rest, it's all new. We'll talk a bit more about the security ecosystem, and there we also have a slide about the integration with Cisco ISE, if I'm not mistaken. And then we'll go into DNS data exfiltration, which was briefly touched by Bart, but we'll go in more detail in that, like how it's done, what are the different things that could happen on your network, and then we'll give a demo on how we can pass that through a network, and how we can actually detect that with our DNS analytics. So let's start with the DNS traffic control. So yeah, what our users complaining about slow applications is leading to fast complaints. Two products, one headache. You have a GSLB solution, which can be a separate load balancer that supports it, and a DNS server where you delegate your records. So it's a bit cumbersome to manage how these two systems work together. So if you want the performance without that pain, you can basically do it on the DNS server itself. It's a DNS-based load balancing, so why not do it on the DNS server? So improved user experience, so you can do localization based on where somebody is, etc. And it also reduces capital and OPEX costs, because you don't need to manage two devices. You just do it on your DNS server. So there's a lot less work to do. So how does it work? So basically, a user here does a query for a service, and that service is running in two data centers on two different IP addresses. And then the load balancing, instead of asking it to a separate load balancer, we do it on the device itself, on the DNS server. So he's doing the health checks. He's looking at where is this user located, where are these services located, and he basically gives an answer. In this case, it's the server on the right, and then the client is basically communicating with that server. There's a sort of stickiness, so if the same client asks again for the same service, it will go to the same server as long as that one, of course, remains available. If that goes offline, then DNS will respond with the other one. So what's new in 8.0? Internal application load balancing, where you can basically use your extensible attributes, which you add in your IPAM, for the location. So you can basically make decisions based on the network the request comes from and the service you want to go based on these extensible attributes. We also made a graphical user interface. So in the previous version, you could have some graphical reflection of how does it look like, but you still needed to go to different tabs to configure everything. Now you can just drag and drop and click and change things very easily. And we also enhanced the HTTP, HTTPS monitoring. So in the previous version, we could see like, okay, the the web server is up and running, so we give the answer. Now we can basically look for certain keywords. So you can make a page where you do background checks, where you look if the database is up and running, if the authentication is working, if the web server itself is responding, and you can put your answers in there, and you can basically go look for those answers in that page, so you can have the full monitoring, which goes deeper than is the website up and running. Because if there's just a web page saying site under maintenance, well, is that really up and running? I don't think so. And there's also now DNSSEC support for zones where you have records using load balancing. So the extensible attributes is what makes it really easy to go do load balancing on the DNS server itself. If you have a separate system where you need to do the load balancing, you need to take all these things into account. You need to check which networks belong to which users and which sites. But if you have that information already in your system, why not use it to determine where something needs to go? So the user friendly, so if you go to traffic control, you can basically see your service that you're doing. You can have different pools assigned to it, and then to the pools you can add different service, and you can basically click on these icons and go configure them. To give you an example of how it's configured. For example, you can say here, okay, the destination for my topology is a pool, and we're gonna look for the region EMEA, the country Spain, and the site Barcelona, and the building 7. So basically we know that where a user in that, if we assign those parameters to our networks, we can use it to do our load balancing. So that's what's pretty new in 8.0. Any questions on the DNS traffic control? No? Okay, so let's move on to Azure. So Azure, we're very happy it's coming because we first did Amazon, but if we look at customers in Europe and especially in Denmark, we see that a lot more users are tending to go to Azure than to Amazon. Amazon is very popular in the States. In Europe, Azure seems to be the more picked as a choice. How is that here in the room? Any of you working with Azure? I see a nod there. I'm not there. And any of you working with the Amazon cloud? So, okay, that proves my point that in Europe we're more looking at Azure, so that's why we're happy this is there. What are the challenges of deploying stuff in Amazon or in Azure? The same challenges actually. Lack of DNS, IPAM, and security. So you can run your own DNS service on a Microsoft server in Azure, but you cannot really combine things. You don't really have visibility on what you deployed there in your IPAM system. And yeah, how you deal with multi-cloud platform, because nobody here in the room is going to put everything in Azure. Although there are those type of companies, but that are usually companies that just start up and they say like, we're not going to make our own data center, we're going to start straight away in the cloud. But everybody else who has a legacy, has physical infrastructure, might have already a private virtual data center, which can be VMware, which can be OpenStack, or both. Have deployed maybe some services in Azure and maybe some in Amazon. So how you keep track of all those things? Well, if you can do that from one IPAM system and you extend just your IPAM and your DNS to the public cloud, that makes it a lot easier to work with. So public DNS in the public cloud, extend your grid. You can put members in Azure that are part of your grid. You can reuse your IPAM. You can do discovery of the Azure cloud or the Amazon cloud, and it's multi-cloud, so we can support all the different ones. Which brings us to exactly the same slide as Bart already showed, so we'll go over this quicker. So enterprise-grade DNS in Azure, what can you do? So you have your private space where you have already maybe some Infoblox in infrastructure, a grid master candidate. You can simply extend that by bringing, for example, secondary DNS servers to your different Azure regions. So you can deploy services in different regions, and then within regions you can make your virtual nets, and you can basically deploy Infoblox appliances there, and you can use them both for internal and external DNS. So if you say, for example, I want to run my own external DNS, but I just don't want a single point of failure because I only have one connection to the internet, maybe you can also run a device in the cloud, for example. Visibility on the Azure resources. So you can see your different tenants, where you see here VMware machines, OpenStack, you see some Docker elements, but here we see our Azure, which has a name, which is the default. It's a difficult name that's added, an ID, the number of VMs, networks that you have in there. If you click then on that tenant, you can see all the machines that are deployed within that tenant with all the details, their DNS name, their IP address, and how many networks they're connected, their virtual machine ID. So all this good information is added automatically to your IPAM infrastructure. How we can add that? By automating it via vDiscovery. So we can discover the Azure cloud, and we can even make immediately DNS records out of it. So if you already have deployed some machines in Azure, you can basically go discover them. We can see what the host names of these machines are, and we can immediately add them in DNS, so they are available there as well. Going to the cloud, we're also very flexible regarding licenses. If you have a virtual machine on the local prem, there's no separate SKU or no separate thing to buy to put that in Azure. So you can move that machine with the same license to the Azure cloud, for example. Or you can do pool licensing, where you can basically, because if you run machines in Azure, it costs you money on compute. So maybe you need sometimes big performance, but other times you don't need big performance. Let's say, for example, a company that sells concert tickets, and there is a concert from Beyonce or anybody else who is hip. That's 1 hour, there's going to be a lot of requests. So you want the power. So you can scale out more DNS servers at the moment that there is going to be the launch of the sale of a new concert, and then when all the tickets are sold out, you can squeeze it down again, so you save on your Azure costs, but you can basically spin up machines on the fly. So in a hybrid cloud, we add consistency to your DNS. You can use the same DNS zone for the whole environment. You can use, if the machine is in Azure or in Amazon or in your local VM or it's a physically connected device, you can use the same DNS naming conventions and stick them in the same zone without doing it manually. The automation, which eliminates a lot of steps in the deployment, and the visibility, what's in your Azure or in the different tenants, what have you deployed. Any questions on that one? No? Okay. So let's move to our VMware plugin 4.0. Anybody who knows what our plugins do in the VMware world, what they are used for? No? Nobody knows? Okay. So they exist for a while, and we're basically evolving them. So we'll talk about what's new there. But basically, the idea of the plugin is if you have an orchestration layer in your data center, so basically a consumer can say, give me 3 Linux machines and give me 2 Microsoft desktops and give me a Windows server. Basically, what the plugin does is link those orchestration tools to your IPAM. If you don't do that, typically what's done in organizations is say like, okay, these are the people that manage our virtual infrastructure. We give them a range and they can use that range as they like. But that means you don't have visibility in your IPAM, because in your IPAM it just says, okay, the VMware guys are using this range, but what's on which IP connected, you don't know. So to automate that part into the IPAM and the DNS part, the plugin will ask for the next available IP address. The IP address is then configured on the machine by the orchestrator, and it's also added in DNS. And maybe even more important, when the device is decommissioned, it's also taken out. So it's taken out of IPAM, because classical example where you work with a ticketing system where somebody needs a DNS record, they open a ticket, they say, okay, give me a DNS record for this device. A couple months later, the device is no longer needed, they clean the device up. What happens to the DNS? They're not going to open a ticket to remove that DNS record, so it grows, 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 and grows. So that's very important in this kind of automations, that you also automate the other way around. What's new about the 4.0 plugin is that it's included in VMware, it's built in. So you can just launch it, where the earlier plugins you needed to go download them, install them, and so on. Now they're just available in VMware out of the box. So how does it look like? So you have basically an allocate and a release that you have. So you have your Infoblox in VRA, and then basically you can make your workflows where you can point where your Infoblox devices are, how you want to look into those details, etc. Where does it live? Well, it lives on the orchestrator. So it's a plugin that is added on the orchestrator. So you have your virtual infrastructure, your ESX server, maybe a vCenter on top of it, and then an orchestration platform. And then the vRealize automation runs, is your cloud management platform that runs on top of it. And then basically it adds records on the fly in your IPAM when needed. So how does the provisioning work? So a cloud admin user requests a VMware machine. vRealize starts to build up that machine. In the orchestrator there is the plugin running. That plugin asks for the next available IP address in the workflow, contacts the Infoblox appliance, which can be the local grid master or can also be one of our cloud platform appliances in Azure, Amazon, or another virtual data center for local survivability. And then vCenter basically configures, spins up that those machines that are requested, configures the IP address, but not only the IP address, also the gateway, the DNS names that need to be used, the domain name. Any information that you could store in DHCP options can be manually configured on the devices by the orchestrator as well. And then the VMware exists with that IP address and the DNS record, and it's ready for use without any manual intervention of opening a ticket and can I please have an IP address, and by the way, could you also add a DNS record for it. So deprovisioning is then the opposite way when in the cloud admin guide the VMware is destroyed, the plugin goes to the Infoblox, cleans up the records so they are available again for the next use. So if we look at the different releases, so we started with that in August 2014. Our first plugin was quite limited in a sense that, for example, we couldn't use any extensible attributes, so it was up to the person deploying a new machine to select which network it should be. But the people managing the cloud infrastructure usually don't know which IP addresses they need to use because they're used to asking the network guys which IP can they use. So that's what we improved in version 2. We also moved then to the RESTful API, and here you could use the extensible attributes where you could basically say like, okay, I want to deploy a machine in site X for HR, and then based on the extensible attributes we know, okay, there's this IP range and that's where it's gonna be deployed. And then now in August we launched version 4, which is a native endpoint within VMware. There was also a demo given and a presentation given on VMware World about this by VMware. These are actually slides I took from them. And then in between we had our 3.2 support, which had the support for vRealize 7.0, but now in vRealize 7.1 it's native. So this one you really don't need anymore. If you have an older platform or you don't have vRealize, you can still use the other plugins, but basically if you have vRealize 7.1 deployed, you can just search for the component, go to a setup wizard, and that's it. There's also a very comprehensive deployment guide, 40 pages with all the screenshots how you can do it, so it's become very easy to deploy the IPOM automation. So what is new? New and improved workflows, easier to do the setup with fewer steps. Native in there, tight integration, and also we can provision NSX load balancers from out of that new plugin. So there you can basically say like I have my load balancer IP, I have my different VMs, and you can add VMs, remove VMs, and that's automatically being added IP addresses and individual DNS names allocated while it's being load balanced by the NSX load balancer of VMware. So yeah, the easiest setup, it's there. You have a setup wizard which you can run, and there you can fill out where your Infoblox appliance is, what's the credentials you need to use, etc. And then the provisioning of the NSX load balancer. So in the load balancer you can also use, for example, for the network, you can say I want the NIOS net extension, and NIOS is, as some of you might know, our operating system in Infoblox. So if you want to know more about it, I guess the slides will be shared to you later. I don't know, is that correct? So there's a lot of links here. There's also, for example, a webinar on how you can completely install that. If you just look on YouTube and you type in Infoblox plugin 4.0, you will get 2 movies, one that gives a demo about it, which we might show if you have some time left at the end of this session. And we have also a YouTube movie which goes through the complete installation process, so you can follow that one as well.